Good evening, good afternoon, should I say, and welcome to Wednesday's Manaaki, the eve of going down to alert level 2, and you can sense in the air around where we are in our city, it's palpable. The tension is palpable. People wanting to go and get their haircuts, wanting to go and sit down with a friend or two and have coffee. But I say what the governor's always said, please be vigilant and stay safe. But we continue on here at Manaaki as your advisory service to help you guide you, small business enterprises, through this COVID-19 and out the other side. To use a phrase that we have used many times, it's a time to thrive and not just survive. Well, one area that comes down to the survival is the charity sector. Got a very special woman to talk to today. Rochelle Stewart-Allen is the GM of Hui Ē community Aotearoa. It says it's a charity. It says it's a charity. Where have you gone? You've gone. You've lost her. Put your camera back on. There you go. I lost you for a moment there. But you're not really a charity. You're more an umbrella group, aren't you, Rochelle?
Sure. Essentially, we sit across the community sector, so the charity sector, across the whole of New Zealand, around the nation. And our focus is on championing the community sector. So that means that we promote, strengthen, connect the sector, both within itself and externally, so to government, to the philanthropic sector, to business, to other areas of the community.
But the charities, and there are many of them, did I read something? I wrote down, you sent me some information, something like what, 115,000 not-for-profits in this country alone. Do they know do they know about you?
Probably not. There's 27,000 registered charities, and then 115,000 broader groups. Some are registered and some are not. No, I'm sure some of them do not know about us.
So how did this come together, Hui Ē community Aotearoa?
So it was born in 2014, a combination of two other charities that were doing similar work in Angoa, which was the Association of NGOs Aotearoa and Social Development Partners, doing similar work to what we do now, and they were finding it tough, and they decided they'll be stronger together. So they connected and launched Hui Ē, and we've been going since then.
How does one fund? How do you get funded out of all of this?
At the moment, we're funded through a couple, through lotteries and a government fund, but it's tough. It's tough to get funding for umbrella organisations in New Zealand. It's tough for people to understand exactly what the umbrella organisations do and the collective purpose that we serve.
And hence, one of your desires is to connect with other charities around the country. Why is this not, shall I say, government endorsed? Is it, or is it?
Well, government has its fingers in many pies, and they do definitely use us and find it really useful to be able to go to one or a collective of organisations rather than have to point them in the right direction, rather than have to say go to 50 or 100 or 27,000 charities. But currently we're not recognised as being fully funded by government at this stage.
Is that part of the promote, strengthen and connect?
Absolutely. Definitely connecting in with the government is vitally important, and particularly at this time, but just in general, driving policy decisions around what happens in the sector is really important as well, keeping them informed, and then also informing back into our community organisations about the decisions that are being made in government.
Do you think now is a good time to hasten the idea of trying to be endorsed by government and get government funding because of what we are going through? Because I'm sure we'll talk in a moment, the sector is struggling.
I think it's a very, very good time, and I think it's really important, the recognition of the sector now and what we're actually playing in terms of the wellbeing and the economy, just in general, but particularly during this lockdown period and whatever's going to become the new normal. The community sector is really vital in this period of time going forward.
I mean, there's so many charities. I mean, you can't cover everyone off, but have you anecdotal evidence of how tough it is out there at the moment?
We do. We've been working during the lockdown matching community organisations with pro bono grant writers. So we've had about 130 community groups, some registered, some not, applying to us in that time. And it's really, really tough for organisations right now. So they've had to, some of them completely change what they're doing overnight because of the needs of the community. They are already in a very constrained funding environment, and it's very tough for this, particularly, I call them the community SMEs, So the ones who don't have that infrastructure, so they're not having fundraisers, they don't have large donor bases, they don't have reserves, they don't have marketing and comms, they don't have PR people telling their story and have really large brands. So they don't have any of those resources. So it's very tough for them to actually demonstrate the needs, which has for some tripled or quadrupled during this period of lockdown.
Who's quadrupled? Who's tripled?
When you talk to the community leaders that are leading these organisations, and I've also talked to a number of the people who are in the community supporting these organisations, the level of what they've had to deliver has gone really expanded so quickly because some of the traditional support systems were not in place. So an example is if you've had people in your community sector that like aged care, for example, that might have been able to come to you once a week and get support or pick up things, suddenly they're unable to leave their house. So straight away you've got much more contact. You've got to put a lot more effort into connecting with them. It's a lot more manually heavy, so you might have to call them because they might not be on the internet. You might not be able to email them. You've got to call them. You've got to identify their needs. Then you've got to help meet their needs.
But that's pretty important, right? You and I talked a moment ago about you've got to have a fallback because we can't just rely on technology. Yes, in the world which continues to evolve, it's a great way of connecting, communicating. But if that technology falls over, you've got to have what I might term a basic fallback plan.
Absolutely, and we see, examples in rural communities as well, or communities that might not have digital access, so they might not have devices, they might not be able to afford the internet. Suddenly those kind of tech solutions or even tech messaging might not be available, and it's great to see some of that core messaging, for example, coming out on TV, because TV is a free service for people. So people who might not be able to access technology should be able to actually get that messaging on just their normal TV.
How many charities have been just going old school and, let's just pick up the phone?
A lot. I mean, we worked, one of the grant matching ones that we did was the Bluff Isolation Group, and they made 700 calls around their community because they had a large percent of rurally isolated people or people over 65. And at that stage, they didn't have a database. So now they have a database, but they went through election rolls, they went out to maraes, they did this huge amount of work just to identify who are those people. And then the next point is then to actually what are their needs. And then the third point is how do you actually help meet those needs?
When we talk about quadrupled and tripled, those that have been in need, how much of that is just basic necessities? We talk about food banks and the like.
Definitely a lot of it's food. A lot of the organisations that we did grant matching with came through with food, and that was before McDem was picking up some of that work. But it's things like wood and coal so that people were warm. It was medicine. How do people access medicine, particularly elderly people if they're not able to leave their house? Vital. Some of it's vital and life-saving medicine. Some of it was care packages, like for young mums with young babies. For people with disabilities, people with diabetes, like how do you actually access your diabetes medication? A lot.
Do you feel that the rest of the country realise how much pain there is out there?
I don't think so. I think we hear, essentially we hear in media about the social issues and the social deficits that are happening. But because of this kind of invisibility of the sector, we're very big in delivering front face. So we're out there in the communities delivering things very quickly and very importantly, and we're not telling the stories. So the stories are not able to get through, and part of that is from the infrastructure, but we just simply we're not funded to tell stories. We don't have people to tell stories. So we need other people to tell those stories for us.
And what I'm assuming when you say front face, you talk about this, just getting actual physical connection. Is that correct?
I think, so when I'm saying front facing, just actually people on the ground in their local community, meeting people within that community and helping meet what their needs are or helping them, meet their own needs.
So one would suggest going to a level 2 is somewhat of a reprieve at the moment, just not fixing the problem, which we know is a long call.
Yeah, I think it'll allow some more, we'll get to a certain point where there'll be more face-to-face interaction, which for some community organisations works. But essentially it doesn't actually fix the funding issues and the lack of infrastructure issues that currently exist.
You are watching Manaaki on a Wednesday. We're talking to Rochelle Stewart-Allen from Hui Ē Community Aotearoa, an umbrella organisation trying to sort out the charity system. And I think it is a system, isn't it, in this country? You talk about the funding model. What's wrong with it?
So primarily the funding model, whether it's from government or whether it is from the philanthropic sector, which are the two major funders, it's all what we call tagged funding. So what that means is that if a community organisation or a voluntary organisation is getting funding, then it's tagged to delivery of some kind of a project. What that doesn't cover usually is salaries or operational costs. So operational costs are, your rent, your phones, your internet, etc. So it's not covering that, your transport, all of those kind of costs. It's not necessarily covering salaries. So it's very difficult to apply even for funding for salaries. And so there's a very large portion, like probably 30%, that's actually very difficult to get funding for. And so the community and voluntary sector is severely underfunded, and their operational cost is the main issue. Now, what's happened is that now you've got an even more constrained funding model post the lockdown, because you've got government is likely to have less funding available given what's happening. The philanthropic sector is some are putting more money in now, some funds are on hold, and they're indicating that there's going to be less return on their investment, so they're going to have less money to give going forward, certainly in the short term. You've got the pokies are shut, and there's a lot of money from the local trusts, money going into that. Lotteries, there'll be less money going forward. Business sponsorship will step down. So suddenly you've got in a constrained funding environment, you've got an even bigger pool suddenly just dropping away. It's a real concern. And
that pool is ridiculous. So you gave me the 2018 figures, and I'm staggered. Is it true? $8 billion, and I mean $1 billion, is given to charities each year?
Well, it's $8 billion that the sector generates for GDP, and that's a Stats New Zealand figure. So that's money that's income, that's money they put back into the sector, etc. And then on top of that, you've got volunteering, which is $4 billion. So altogether, the sector that's volunteer labour, that's people are giving for free, is $4 billion. So altogether, that's $12 billion. So it's like 4% of GDP, right? So it's a lot.
I'm staggered. I mean, that's an incredible amount of money. Now, when you talk about the philanthropic end, are you simply talking about business or private individuals and how much do you think that $8 billion is going to be affected?
I think it's going to be affected a lot, and I think we'll see the impact of that in the coming months. I mean, we just know that there's going to be less money around, and it's really time now for new solutions. So the government is not the solution for the only solution for the sector. It's great if they fully funded the services that are being rolled out in the social service sector that they are contracting out for, instead of a percent of it. But it's not, the solution is a community-wide solution here. We need all sectors of community to come together to actually help us continue on providing for the well-being of New Zealanders.
Do you see the rationalisation of charities, some that do the same thing? Because I get the impression the way you're talking now is that less money, some don't have any infrastructure at all, they don't know how to cope, they'll tank, that'll be it. Do you see that happening, that you talked about, 27,000 registered charities, is that correct, the number you gave me? I mean, do you see that number being severely knocked?
I think there will be a number that will look at merging. I mean, some will definitely close down, some will merge, and some will look to shift and change in what they're doing. It's important to remember as well the voluntary sector. So out of that 115,000 nonprofits, 89% don't employ staff. So they're voluntary organisations. So that's like the local beach group, the PTA, the mums group, those kind of groups. The reading group, all these kind of voluntary things. So they will continue on, but some of those services that they provide will be great to have funding for them. There's just not funding available at the moment.
Okay, so let's go back to your 3 core values: promoting, strengthening, and connecting. Let's start with the first one. What's your solution to promote?
Talking to you now is a great opportunity. It's about talking to new audiences. So it's about, exactly what we've been talking today about visibility of the sector, like to promote who the sector is and the good work that we're doing towards both the wellbeing and the social and economic capital in New Zealand. It's important that our stories get out further than us. We have a lot of opportunities, like a lot of sectors, to talk amongst ourselves. So we have a lot of conferences and, ongoing meetings, etc. But it's time now for us to step out and be much more upfront and visible about who we are, the value that we're providing, and what actual needs we have.
But that's hard if you can't afford it. If people are saying, well, actually, if you want to promote and be visible, I'm sorry, it's going to cost you this. So what's the solution? I mean, you talk about community solutions. You're talking about an umbrella solution to try and help the rest. What?
I think one of the things that we see in the voluntary sector is in-kind service, and I think going forward that's going to be really important. I think we have, what we've already seen this during the lockdown. A lot of professionals were at home, and they were maybe getting the wage subsidy, but they still wanted to do something and or give something back because they were getting that. And we saw a really, really large increase on various websites like Help Tank, for example, that have offer volunteers to the pro bono volunteering to community sector. We see a lot of those professionals coming up and stepping out. We know that there's a whole lot of people that are already businesses that are already working with community organisations and charities. The best thing they could do right now is ask them, what do you need? Actually just saying, what do you need, and then how can we help? Okay,
so that's where you think you're from. Okay, does strengthen come on the back of this, or is it strengthening in other areas? And I suppose the one thing you've already touched on, that infrastructure, trying to sort of rationalize everybody to have a proper infrastructure as a charity.
I think it's about strengthening the sector, and that's many things. So that's things like, yes, infrastructure. It's about training. It's about resource. It's about strengthening our voice as well, which ties into the promoting. It's about really having much more clarity about who we are and having a shared and collective voice, which is what we've seen emerging during this lockdown period.
And then, of course, is the connecting. There's that basically ties in with the promoting, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because the sector is traditionally delivered. Most charities are working in their communities with people face to face. So it's been quite a shift to then go online. But then so much of this that I'm hearing, so many of the stories are still picking up the phone, like the old ways. Just pick up the phone, have a chat with someone. Some of the charities are giving out, as part of the resources they're giving out, vouchers for phone credit for youth, for example, so that they can keep talking to their friends, they can keep being connected.
What is the biggest challenge for any charity?
I think it's visibility, because I think when people fully see who you are and the service you provide, usually there's fantastic stories that's coming out of that. And once they hear those stories, then people are keen to help. And so many people are really generous in New Zealand. We're one of the most generous countries in the world. So many people step up when they see the need, but they have to hear about that need to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm really impressed in many ways of your attitude. Government's not the answer. And when we've been going in through this lockdown here on Manaaki and talking about buying local, look after local, do you think in there lies a key message going forward?
I think so. I think, government's part of the answer, but it's not the full answer. I think, at the end of the day, this is the concept of Manaaki, right? The reality is that we actually care for each other. We build society by caring about not just our own families, but our neighbourhoods, our wider community that we live in, and we can do that in all different ways. Like, money is one thing, but there's a whole lot of different ways that we can share and care for each other. And the collective going forward, when you look at other societies that maybe are not that well off, and then you start to see, money is just one way that you can have the things that you need. There's a whole lot of really fantastic communities that don't have a lot of money, but they're very rich in the life that they live and the sharing and the support that they provide for each other. So money is one part of the equation, but it's not the only part. And you can't live in New Zealand without money, but that doesn't stop you having a really rich and culturally interesting life.
Yes, but it also comes back to your idea of visibility, right? It's all well and good, but someone's got to pay the bills if you want to be visible. Have you looked at targeting individuals, organisations about creating greater visibility?
We're starting to do that now. So I'm reasonably new into the role. I started at the end of January. So I was kind of 6 weeks in before the lockdown hit. So it was what they call a baptism by fire. But we're in the middle of that now. So starting to talk to other organisations to help us in this process. So it's visibility of us, the organisation Hui Ē, as well as the visibility of the wider sector and the value that we provide.
I'm going to be blunt. What sort of organisations are you approaching? I mean, who are you targeting? So, okay, we need to get our message out.
So we're currently working with a consultancy, Frank Advice, and they're working with us and Volunteering New Zealand to start to really define who are we and the real value that we provide, the two organisations, and the value that we provide to Aotearoa. We also working really closely with Philanthropy New Zealand and starting to talk to them collectively about how we work together and demonstrate the value of the sector. And then we've been involved in another joint project with a whole lot of other organisations, and they're actually working with one of the ad agencies, and we're hoping that they'll come back with some pro bono support.
Yeah, are you getting any pushback in the industry?
It's really interesting because I don't think so. I'm yet to, once you tell the story, like people are very motivated. All our lives are really touched every day by the charity sector. So it's whether you are, in the local mums group or the beach cleanup group or the PTA or the Wellington Free Ambulance, or you go to the theatre, or, you have a family member who's got a disability, or you've used a mental health app. Like all these things are run by charities. We just don't realise that.
Have you thought of going to these organised bigger charities? Okay, these are the ones that sit outside your purview, might you say? The big ones, and going, hang on, if we could take a lot of stress off your organisation if you let us sort of not take control, but sort of have an overview and control. Terrible word to use, but control the sector.
I think that the really large organisations are quite self-sufficient in what they do, and they're really good at reaching out. And they've got, if you have a really large donor base, like if you have a membership management within your organisation, then you have a really big infrastructure and group of people that you can reach out to for help. So you have less need, but they do. Collectively, all the charities do at various times work together collectively, because everybody recognises that a collective voice is the strongest way forward for all of us. So I get
the feeling you're up against a rock and a hard place, because you're talking about. What did you say? You're trying to look at those SMEs, charities, as you would call them, below that $2 million mark, right? Mm-hmm. And I feel like those ones above are knocking you for a six, and you're not going to get a look in, which makes your job so much harder. So hence my question, is it about time to, go to the mountain and say, hang on, kids? And that's probably where you need government backing.
Yeah, I think that would be great if that happens. I think, it's a similar way as if you talk about really large corporates helping small SMEs. For me, it's the same thing. And there's different motivations, but there are core values that draw people together. So it would be great if we could work together to share resources, absolutely.
Without trying to be too political about it, is it a bit of a dog-eat-dog industry?
It's in a very constrained funding environment, it generates competition. That's how
that's so politically well put.
In the community sector, we like to be like that. We're very.
We don't want to upset the avocado. Yes, it's a very competitive environment.
It's constrained funding where people are competing for the same funding. It automatically doesn't breed collaboration, which is really unfortunate. And there are some, for example, in the philanthropic organisations, like there's a Working Together Fund, which is like 3 or 4 different philanthropy funders coming together to say, if you have a shared project across different charities coming together and working collaboratively, then we'll give you more money. So that's a really good example of incentivizing collaboration.
Is that not a better way then to start looking at? Would you go down that path and start heading in that direction with that organisation? Say, okay, here's a model that's pretty much is what we want to do. Let's extend off that.
We have, and there is some wider work as well in the philanthropic sector talking about that too, about how joint funding could work for a single organisation or multiple organisations. So that really that whole funding model needs to shift and change as well. At the moment, there's a lot of kind of issues around the resource it takes to apply for funding and their level of accountability, and then the difficulty around all that responsibility currently sits on the individual community organisations to apply for multiple funding.
And how long does that funding take for organisations to receive once they put their application in, and if they are lucky enough to get it?
It's usually about 3 months, by which time your project might have started. And then when you get funded, so maybe you asked for 100K and you might have got 50K, but the expectation is that you would still deliver 100K. And then you can't apply retrospectively. This is a very complex subject, but you can't apply retrospectively.
I'm
your project started, and then you've committed to staff to work on that specific project. It needs a lot of work.
Okay, so in your perfect world, how does it work? Understanding the constraints of funding and everybody wanting their piece of the pie. What would you like to see on a national level?
What I'd like to see is the core government services contracted on multi-years for the full cost of the services. That's a really good.
So lay that one out for me, just rather than, lay that one out.
So a lot of the services that we might receive out in the community, the central government pays for. So they contract out to individual charities around the country, and that can be rolled over year after year after year for a very long period of time. But for a lot of those contracts, they're just single 12-month contracts. So for 12 months, you get this amount of money to deliver this service. Right. Then you have to reapply, or you have to wait until maybe the last minute to know, is that really going to be rolled over again? Whereas most of them remain similar. So you could at least sign someone up for 3 years. So you've got 3 years of funding for that. It's difficult because the budgets are different every year, right, in government. So this is part of the reason. But some of these services have been ongoing and are core services, like health services, for example, that it's unlikely to shift and change. The other thing that's working in the philanthropic sector, which is there's lots of conversations and discussions going on, is that one organisation could apply through, say, a portal, and then behind the scenes you've got multiple philanthropic foundations joining together to say, right, we'll fund that one organisation. And then on top of that, some of that being what I've said before about untagged funding, so that you can apply it. Like Todd Foundation's a good example. They work really closely with the people that they fund. They get to know them, and they say, here's an untagged pool of money for the next 3 years. You spend it how you need the most for the people that you serve. And then we'll come together once a year. They have a hui, they bring all those people who are funded, and they really get to know each other and work out how they can support them. So those kind of new funding models are really fantastic.
How many of those many, many thousands of organisations, though, are really up for that?
It's a process. It's like
we said not to use that word. Remember, we're not allowed to use that word.
Yeah, you're not. That's right. You didn't like the word. You didn't like the word process. But it takes time to educate people about the way to enact change. Change doesn't happen overnight. You've got to educate people about, this is the problem, these are other potential solutions. We'll help enable you to do that. There's no quick wins to suddenly completely change. Like a foundation that's been funding people for 50 years in a particular way, Like you have to work with them over a period of time to help them understand why that's not working.
Can you make this work? Can you see, and because I think you're saying this whole sector is going to, like everybody else, is going through a total reset. We're probably going to lose some organisations as well. Can you see Hui Ē Community Aotearoa getting it done, getting what you want, and trying to bring everybody together, all those thousands of people, those 1.3 some million volunteers, and the people that are running those organisations, and going in one direction?
I think, well, we're certainly committed to doing it, and I think there will be a percent of people who will commit to that. You're never going to get everybody, but I think once we can start to demonstrate the benefits of that collective direction and pathway forward together with a shared voice, I think people will start to see, yeah, there's actual real value in this, and value for us as an organisation, as a small community organisation. It's valuable to actually have someone sitting over the top doing that work that we don't have time or capacity to do.
So all you need basically is a good producer, director, and a cameraman. You need someone with an idea to come and sit to you. You need a television network to give you that visibility, all for gratis, and it's a start.
That would be perfect.
Oh, that's magnificent. Rochelle Stewart-Allen, General Manager of Hui Ē Community Aotearoa, I thank you for your time. You have a hell of a challenge in front of you. I wish you the best of luck, and I hope here at Manaaki we've given you another platform, a little more visibility, that someone goes, aha, maybe we can help.
Thanks, Stephen.
You're more than welcome. There you go. That is Rochelle Stewart-Allen, the GM of Hui Ē Community Aotearoa. $8 billion, part of the GDP. That's just the product, money, and services that goes into the community sector. That is unbelievable. If you can do your part, get in touch with the team at Manaaki. We'll get in touch with Rochelle, and maybe you can help them out and get their message out there. They want to be more visible. And Rochelle said one lovely thing: New Zealanders are giving people. We are giving people. And so we'll just have to sit back and wait and see. So if you can do your part, get in touch with the Manaaki team, and maybe we can do our bit. Coming your way on Friday, one of the most entertaining or enterprising young New Zealanders going around, Nick Mowbray from Zuru. He comes your way at 2:30 on Friday here on Manaaki. I'm Stephen McIver. Stay safe and enjoy tomorrow, which is day one of level 2. But most importantly, be vigilant and don't be a dick.